June 4, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Non-commissioned officer Herman Butcher gripped the vessel's protective barrier as he disembarked the gangplank, his equilibrium challenged after 14 days traversing the Atlantic. Through the early morning mist, he observed a sight that directly opposed 3 years of Nazi indoctrination. American laborers, both Caucasian and of African descent, operated in unison with equipment that appeared to hail from a future era. Females in practical work attire commanded cranes. Youngsters peddled publications at the entry points. No one recoiled at the appearance of enemy insignia. "Die spinnen die Amerikaner," he murmured to the individual behind him, translating to, "They're crazy, these Americans." Butcher would later chronicle this event in his published memoir, Behind Barbed Wire, released in Germany in 1952, offering one of the most thorough accounts of prisoner of war existence in America. The Norfolk facility extended over 4,300 acres, its piers vanishing into the horizon, its hoisting apparatuses simultaneously loading and unloading a multitude of vessels. In a single dawn, this solitary port processed a volume of cargo that surpassed Hamburg's weekly capacity. Yet, it was not the sheer magnitude that astounded the newly arrived captives. It was the normalcy. Non-combatants moved about freely near military installations. Vendors offered coffee and donuts within view of warships. A brass ensemble performed popular tunes at a nearby war bond solicitation event. 2,500 veterans of the German Africa Corps stood assembled on American ground, the initial significant contingent of what would ultimately become 425,000 German captives detained within the United States by the conflict's conclusion. What they would encounter in the subsequent months transcended mere American affluence. That narrative has been widely disseminated. They would witness something far more disquieting to the military psyche. A nation at war that steadfastly refused to behave as such. A society so confident in its strength that it treated mortal adversaries akin to wayward house guests. And a populace whose peculiar customs and inexplicable conduct would prove more detrimental to Nazi ideology than any battlefield defeat. The processing at Norfolk commenced with what Butcher would later deem in his memoir, the first impossibility. German military doctrine, applied from Poland to France to Africa, dictated that prisoners were either resources to be exploited or burdens to be minimized. The Geneva Convention was acknowledged when expedient and disregarded when inconvenient. Yet here, American officers were reciting Geneva Convention stipulations in flawless German, elucidating rights and inquiring about dietary preferences. According to records from the International Red Cross dated June 1943, personnel of Jewish heritage from America, including several sergeants bearing distinctly Jewish surnames, distributed Red Cross provisions, while informing recipients that kosher sustenance was readily available for any Jewish captives. A number of Wehrmacht soldiers responded with nervous laughter, mistaking it for derision. It was no such thing. The American military had made provisions for the religious and dietary requirements of its adversaries. The medical evaluations defied military rationale. German captives with injuries received the same penicillin, that remarkable medication with scarce availability for German field hospitals, as did American servicemen. Swiss Red Cross Inspector Guy Matroy noted in his July 1943 report, "The medical care extended to German prisoners of war is equal to, or surpasses, that provided to American military personnel." The prisoners expressed profound disbelief regarding the caliber of care received. African American medical personnel served in integrated units at Norfolk, though this integration was not universal across the armed forces. One documented instance involved a medical technician of color who drew blood from Wehrmacht officers for routine health assessments. In Germany, such interracial contact was legally prohibited. Here, it was standard military procedure. The most perplexing spectacle occurred during their initial meal. German captives were escorted to a mess hall where American sailors were dining. The two factions, adversaries who had been actively seeking each other's demise in convoy engagements, shared the same facility. Americans occupying one end, Germans the other, availing themselves of the same food lines and identical quality meals. The Americans exhibited no particular curiosity, their attention more engrossed in a radio broadcast of a baseball game than in their enemies situated 50 feet away. The 3-day rail journey to camps situated inland presented the next stratum of cognitive dissonance. Unlike the clandestine movements of prisoners within Germany, American authorities made no effort to conceal the prisoners of war. The trains, not freight cars but actual passenger coaches equipped with cushioned seating, halted at ordinary stations where civilians congregated to observe. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., an event witnessed by hundreds and recorded in the station's logs from June 1943, German captives observed American families bidding farewell to soldiers en route to training facilities. Wives embraced their husbands publicly. Children waved flags. Teenagers shared milkshakes at the station's eatery. The same platform hosted adversaries and families, separated merely by glass partitions and guards who appeared more occupied with managing traffic flow than with surveilling the captives. The trains traversed industrial zones that ought to have been concealed, camouflaged, and secured. Instead, factories proudly displayed their names in immense lettering. The Glenn L. Martin Aircraft Manufacturing Facility in Baltimore featured parking lots, visible from the train, teeming with the personal automobiles of its workforce. Prisoners were able to count the B-26 bombers lined up for delivery. There was no pretense of concealment, no security-related paranoia, simply American industry operating in plain view of its enemies. Across Pennsylvania, the trains passed collieries and steel mills operating on continuous shifts. The nocturnal sky radiated an orange luminescence from blast furnaces that never ceased their operation. Residences for workers, individual dwellings complete with gardens rather than barracks, extended for miles around each industrial complex. Electric illumination blazed in every window. Radio antennas protruded from every rooftop. At a stop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, an event documented in Pennsylvania Railroad records, German officers observed American laborers during a shift change. Men carrying their midday meals, clad in leather footwear and wristwatches, driving their private vehicles. According to Butcher's memoir, one laborer discarded a partially consumed apple and produced a fresh one from his lunchbox. The casual wastage of sustenance by a worker stunned officers who had witnessed their own men contending for meager portions in Africa. Camp Hearn, Texas, established in December 1942 on 720 acres adjacent to the municipality of Hearn in Robertson County, held up to 4,800 German prisoners in conditions that surpassed what many had experienced as civilians, as evidenced by military records. The camp's construction and management are exhaustively detailed in Army Corps of Engineers documents and War Department files housed at the National Archives. The very infrastructure challenged the German understanding of prisoner accommodation. Wooden barracks equipped with electric lighting, not oil lamps. Indoor sanitation facilities featuring flush toilets and hot water heaters in each structure. Individual sleeping arrangements complete with mattresses, linens, and blankets in lieu of straw bedding. Recreational lounges furnished with ping-pong tables, musical instruments, and libraries. Swiss Inspector Emil Sandstrom noted in his August 1943 report, "The conditions at Camp Hearn exceed not only the stipulations of the Geneva Convention, but also surpass the living standards that many of these individuals knew in Germany." The commandant, Lieutenant Colonel Cecile Stiles, whose service record is preserved in military archives, addressed the arriving prisoners in German, having studied the language at university prior to the war. He outlined the camp regulations and, crucially, introduced an unprecedented concept. Prisoners would largely be responsible for their own internal governance within the compounds. They would select representatives, organize activities, and manage their own schedules within prescribed military parameters. This notion of self-determination for adversaries was perceived as either a sign of weakness or a calculated deception. The camp hospital, subjected to monthly inspections by the International Red Cross, contained medical apparatuses that many German civilian hospitals lacked, including X-ray machines, surgical theaters, dental chairs, and pharmaceutical supplies, notably the new miracle drug, penicillin. When prisoner Georg Gartner, who would later achieve renown as the final prisoner of war to surrender in 1985, developed appendicitis in September 1943, he underwent surgery within hours, performed by Captain William Calhoun, an Army surgeon from Dallas, with the assistance of German prisoner medical staff. However, nothing could have prepared them for the camp commissary, a retail establishment where prisoners could procure items utilizing script earned through voluntary labor. These included cigarettes, confectionery, cleansing agents, stationery, musical instruments, and art supplies. The War Department sanctioned these sales, as documented in Quartermaster Corps records, believing that modest comforts would sustain prisoner morale and diminish the likelihood of escape attempts. The very idea that enemy captives might shop, make selections, and have their needs met beyond basic survival needs fundamentally disrupted established military thinking. By September 1943, severe labor shortages necessitated the employment of prisoners of war throughout Texas. The War Manpower Commission, in collaboration with the Provost Marshal General's Office, authorized the utilization of prisoner labor in agricultural and non-military sectors. Prisoners earned 80 cents per diem in commissary script, a wage equivalent to that of American privates. Detailed records pertaining to these work programs are extant in National Archives Record Group 389. At the King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, German prisoners of war encountered American agriculture on a scale that defied European comprehension. The ranch encompassed 825,000 acres, a tract larger than the state of Rhode Island. Ranch records from 1943 to 1945 indicate that German prisoners worked alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and a number of African-American ranch hands in cattle operations. This intermingling of races in labor, though socially restricted, contradicted Nazi racial hierarchy doctrines. Prisoners documented their astonishment at the level of mechanization in correspondence that passed military censorship. A single combine harvester rendered obsolete the labor of dozens of workers. Trucks, rather than horse-drawn conveyances, transported harvests. The ranch even employed aircraft, small civilian planes, for surveying cattle herds and identifying strays. Ranch foreman Richard Kleberg, Jr., according to ranch employment records, treated German prisoners of war as temporary employees rather than as adversaries. At cotton processing facilities throughout Texas, including operations meticulously documented in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, prisoners of war witnessed processing speeds unattainable by European standards. The Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, which engaged prisoner labor from August 1943 to December 1945, processed more cotton in a single day than German textile mills handled in an entire month. Yet, workers observed regular breaks, consumed substantial lunches, and listened to radios while engaged in their tasks. Productivity achieved through humane treatment rather than harsh discipline was antithetical to the Wehrmacht experience. The prisoners discovered that American farmers engaged in open political discourse. Declassified FBI surveillance reports from the 1970s noted that German prisoners of war were astounded by farmers openly criticizing Roosevelt and voicing grievances about government policies without any apparent fear of reprisal. In one documented incident at a farm near Bryan, Texas, a farmer responded to a Department of Agriculture inspector with profanity regarding crop allocation disputes. The farmer faced no repercussions. Such blatant insubordination towards authority would have resulted in execution in Nazi Germany. Local newspapers across Texas featured accounts of German prisoner interactions with American civilians. The Hearn Democrat, the Bryan Daily Eagle, and the Temple Daily Telegram all published articles detailing prisoner work details and community engagements. These contemporary narratives provide corroboration of social encounters that deeply unsettled the military captives. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported on German prisoners of war participating in supervised Christmas shopping excursions, during which they witnessed American teenage culture. Young men and women congregated at drugstore soda fountains, boys and girls together without chaperones. They danced to jukebox melodies, including jazz and swing, genres that Nazi ideology condemned as degenerate music of African descent. They wore fashionable attire despite wartime conditions, exhibiting no militarization of youth culture. The comportment of American women, in particular, profoundly astonished the prisoners. Women operated trucks for the Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, managed businesses along Main Street, and supervised male employees in defense plants. At the nearby Bryan Army Airfield, as part of the Women Air Force Service Pilots WASP program, female pilots flew military aircraft. Military records confirm that WASPs operated from Bryan Field between 1943 and 1944, their activities observable by prisoner work details in the surrounding vicinity. Churches across Robertson County extended invitations to German prisoners to attend services. Church records from the First Baptist Church of Hearne, the First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church all document the attendance of German prisoners at worship services. The December 24, 1943 edition of the Hearne Democrat reported, German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at multiple churches, seated among congregation members whose sons are serving overseas. No incidents were reported. By early 1944, the Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office had instituted sophisticated educational programs at Camp Hearne. Declassified records from Record Group 389 illuminate the scope of this clandestine re-education initiative, although prisoners perceived it merely as voluntary education. The camp library, initially furnished with 500 volumes donated by Hearne residents, expanded to over 5,000 by August 1944. The American Library Association's Books for Prisoners program supplied texts, including works by German authors prescribed by the Nazis. Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, and writings by Jewish authors such as Lion Feuchtwanger were accessible. A German prisoner could peruse literature that would have meant certain death to possess in Nazi Germany. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now Sam Houston State University, offered correspondence courses. University records indicate that 340 German prisoners of war enrolled in courses encompassing English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural sciences between 1944 and 1945. Professors from the college made monthly visits to Camp Hearne to conduct lectures and administer examinations. The matter of the camp newspaper warrants clarification. While Der Ruf was indeed published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, prisoners at Camp Hearne produced their own publication titled Der Spiegel, The Mirror, which should not be confused with the later German news magazine. Copies preserved at the Army Heritage and Education Center reveal an evolution from Nazi propaganda in the early 1943 editions to democratic discourse by late 1944. Declassified documents from the Special Projects Division disclose intricate psychological operations. The program categorized prisoners into three distinct groups: anti-Nazis, approximately 10%, non-political prisoners, 75%, and ardent Nazis, 15%. Each cohort received tailored treatment designed to maximize ideological transformation. Anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through meticulous screening, including analysis of correspondence, conversations, and literary choices, were afforded enhanced privileges and educational opportunities. They assumed roles as barracks leaders, discussion group moderators, and newspaper editors. Their influence on non-political prisoners was carefully nurtured and closely observed. The screening process, devised by Army psychologists and German émigré advisors, incorporated subtle assessments. Prisoners' reactions to news of German setbacks, their selections from library holdings, their participation in educational initiatives, and their social interactions were all meticulously documented. Weekly reports tracked ideological shifts throughout the camp population. Assistant Executive Officer Major Maxwell McKnight, whose papers are preserved at the Hoover Institution, wrote in a November 1944 report, "The transformation rate exceeds expectations. Approximately 60% of non-political prisoners demonstrate measurable progress towards democratic ideals after 6 months of exposure to American society and targeted education. Working in American facilities exposed prisoners of war to a casual abundance that seemed to mock German scarcity. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where prisoners performed duties from September 1943 onwards, workers discarded more aluminum scrap in a single day than German aircraft factories could procure in a week. Plant records indicate that German prisoners of war were assigned to scrap collection, providing them with direct exposure to American industrial waste. Food processing facilities proved to be the source of the most profound psychological shock. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, verified through Milam County historical records as employing prisoners of war from the nearby Camp Hearn, perfectly edible produce was discarded due to minor cosmetic imperfections. Tomatoes that were slightly underripe, corn with irregular kernels, beans with superficial blemishes. All were destroyed, while German civilians endured starvation. A letter from prisoner of war Corporal Friedrich Müller, preserved in Red Cross archives, stated, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit because it did not meet canning standards. Fruit that would be a treasure in Germany is garbage here." The American supervisor apologized to us for the waste, not comprehending that he was apologizing for an abundance we could not imagine. Christmas of 1943 at Camp Hearn is extensively documented in local newspapers, Red Cross reports, and military records. The entire town of Hearn, with a population of 2,000, mobilized to ensure that the enemy prisoners experienced a proper Christmas celebration. This response towards adversaries directly contradicted all expectations of wartime conduct. The Hearn Democrat published a comprehensive list of donations on December 23, 1943. Local churches collected 4,800 individual gift packages. Schools contributed handmade greeting cards and festive decorations. The American Legion Post 164, comprising veterans of World War I who had fought against the Germans, donated cigarettes, candy, and sporting equipment to their current German adversaries. The Lions Club provided musical instruments. The Garden Club adorned the camp with holly and evergreen boughs. The Christmas tree, photographed for the newspaper, stood 30 feet tall in the main compound, illuminated by electric lights that remained continuously lit. Quartermaster records indicate that the camp consumed more electricity for Christmas decorations than most German villages utilized for all purposes. Such an ostentatious electrical display would have been inconceivable even in peacetime Germany. Local churches performed Christmas concerts in German for the prisoners. The First Methodist Church Choir learned German Christmas carols phonetically. Mrs. Sarah Patterson, the choir director whose son was serving in Italy, led the performance. The cognitive dissonance experienced by American mothers singing to enemy soldiers while their own sons fought against Germans had a profound emotional impact on several prisoners. According to Guard reports, the Christmas feast menu, preserved in quartermaster records, included roast turkey, 1 pound per man, ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce, mince pie, apple pie, ice cream, beer for enlisted men, and California wine for officers. The meal totaled approximately 5,000 calories per individual. Meanwhile, German civilian rations, when available, provided a mere 1,200 calories daily. Employment in Texas exposed German prisoners of war to American racial dynamics that contradicted both Nazi propaganda and the prevailing American reputation. The reality, as documented in military reports and local newspapers, was more intricate than either narrative suggested. At Camp Hearn, African American soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment occasionally performed guard duty. German prisoners of war, indoctrinated by Nazi racial ideology, found themselves taking orders from Black Americans. Several prisoners requested transfers rather than submit to Negro authority, requests that were denied by camp administration. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles stated in a December 1943 report, "German prisoner objections to Negro guards are noted and ignored. Yet, prisoners also witnessed the contradictions of segregation. They were permitted to dine in Hearn restaurants that denied service to the Negro soldiers guarding them. They could attend movie theaters where their guards were barred from the main seating sections. In certain contexts, German adversaries enjoyed greater social latitude than American citizens of African descent. This paradox of being treated more favorably than some Americans while simultaneously being designated as enemies destabilized ideological certainties at agricultural work sites, as evidenced by the Farm Security Administration records. Prisoners labored alongside Mexican American and Negro laborers. The efficacy of integrated workforces, when focused on their duties rather than racial distinctions, presented a stark contradiction to Nazi doctrines regarding racial purity and productive capacity. German prisoners of war, toiling alongside African American laborers, witnessed firsthand the superior performance of these individuals, which effectively dismantled prevailing notions of inherent racial superiority. 3 thoroughly documented instances illuminate the profound shifts experienced by these German POWs within the American context. Hermann Bircher arrived at Camp Herne in June of 1943, a staunch adherent of Nazi ideology. His personal account details a gradual erosion of his beliefs, catalyzed by a succession of observations. A pivotal moment occurred during the Christmas season of 1943, when residents of Herne extended festive greetings and presented gifts to the enemy combatants. Bircher eloquently articulated this experience, noting, "These individuals, whose sons we had attempted to eliminate, offered us presents. Their benevolence was not a sign of weakness, but rather of profound strength, reflecting the assurance of victors who understood their triumph extended beyond the battlefield to encompass the ensuing era of peace." Following his release, Bircher immigrated to America in 1953, attained citizenship in 1958, and pursued a successful career as an engineer with General Motors until his retirement. Georg Gartner, another prisoner, managed an escape from Camp Deming, New Mexico, in September of 1945. He lived under the assumed identity of Dennis Wiles for a period of 40 years. Instead of evading authorities, he chose to remain in the United States unlawfully, establishing a life with an American spouse, raising a family, and working as a tennis instructor in California. By the time he voluntarily surrendered himself in 1985 for the production of a television documentary, he had resided in America for a longer duration than he had been a citizen of Germany. His remarkable narrative, chronicled in his autobiography titled Hitler's Last Soldier in America, stands as a testament to the transformative influence of American society. Reinhold Peel eluded confinement from Camp John Hill in Illinois during 1945, not due to mistreatment, but rather out of sheer boredom and a burgeoning curiosity about life in America. His memoir, Enemies Are Human, recounts his experiences. He lived in Chicago illegally for 7 years, finding employment in bookstores and marrying an American woman before willingly turning himself in during 1953. Investigations conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation revealed that he had violated no laws beyond his initial illegal entry. He was granted United States citizenship in 1959 and went on to establish a prosperous business, subsequently sponsoring numerous other German immigrants. The experiences of German POWs varied significantly across the more than 500 camps situated throughout America. Yet, consistent trends began to emerge. Camp Alva in Oklahoma was specifically designated for agricultural training. Records from the Department of Agriculture indicate that German prisoners of war diligently managed a 200-acre demonstration farm, employing innovative American agricultural techniques. The prisoners acquired proficiency in mechanized cultivation, crop rotation strategies, soil conservation practices, and the development of hybrid seed varieties. These acquired skills proved to be exceptionally valuable when the POWs eventually returned to a war-ravaged Germany. The agricultural program at Camp Alva achieved such remarkable success that local farmers actively sought to employ work crews of prisoners, offering them premium wages, which in turn created a competitive market for prisoner labor. Camp Concordia in Kansas distinguished itself through its vibrant arts program. German prisoners of war were responsible for creating murals that can still be observed today within the Stone County Courthouse and several other local edifices. The camp orchestra, outfitted with instruments generously donated by communities across Kansas, regularly presented concerts for civilian audiences. The Concordia Blade, a local newspaper, provided favorable reviews of these musical performances, commending the professional caliber of the musicians, who were, in essence, enemy combatants. Artwork produced by the prisoners is now a permanent fixture in several Kansas museums. Camp Trinidad, located in Colorado, presented unique challenges due to winter temperatures that frequently plummeted to 20 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. Records from the Quartermaster Corps demonstrate that the United States Army provided German prisoners with specialized Arctic-grade attire, heavily insulated barracks, and significantly increased caloric rations, amounting to 4,000 calories daily during the winter months. André Poncho, a Swiss inspector, observed in February of 1944, "The German prisoners at Trinidad are receiving superior winter provisions, compared to those afforded to Wehrmacht troops on the Eastern Front, according to the prisoners' own admissions. Perhaps nothing astonished the German military mind more than the unprecedented transparency of information prevalent in America. Prisoners had access to American newspapers that openly critiqued the war effort, disclosed production challenges, and discussed strategic blunders. The Special Projects Division deliberately furnished a diverse range of news sources, understanding that exposure to a free press would inevitably undermine totalitarian indoctrination. Radio broadcasts, readily available in recreation facilities, featured commentary that was highly critical of military leadership. Comedians such as Bob Hope frequently satirized generals and politicians, while journalists like Edward R. Murrow courageously questioned military strategies. Members of Congress engaged in public debates regarding military appropriations, with dissenting viewpoints broadcast nationally. All of this information was accessible to enemy prisoners. The presidential election campaign of 1944, observed from within the camps, appeared to German military strategists as a form of democratic self-destruction. Franklin D. Roosevelt faced a substantial challenge from Thomas E. Dewey during a time of active warfare. The Republican Party voiced strong criticisms of the administration's war management policies, and opposition viewpoints were openly published in newspapers. Political cartoons frequently depicted the commander-in-chief in a derisive manner. Nevertheless, the war effort not only continued, but demonstrably strengthened. This compelling exhibition of democratic resilience, thriving on discourse rather than being weakened by it, fundamentally challenged authoritarian assumptions. Inspection reports issued by the International Committee of the Red Cross, accessible in the ICRC archives in Geneva, consistently rated American POW camps as exceeding the stipulations of the Geneva Conventions. These impartial assessments offer crucial validation of the conditions maintained within the camps. Inspector Guy Métraux, in his comprehensive report dated August 1944, stated, "American camps surpass treaty requirements across all assessed categories. Food rations are equal to or greater than those provided to American military personnel. Medical care is on par with that offered in American military hospitals. Educational and recreational opportunities exceed those found in many American military training facilities. Specific findings from Camp Hearn detailed caloric intake ranging from 3,300 to 3,800 calories per day, significantly exceeding the Geneva Convention's requirement of 2,000 calories. Living space was allocated at 40 square feet per individual, surpassing the Convention's stipulated 27 square feet. The ratio of medical staff to prisoners was 1 doctor per 500 prisoners, a marked improvement over the Convention's requirement of 1 per 1,000. Furthermore, opportunities for recreation, organized sports, access to libraries, and educational programs were provided, exceeding the Convention's mandate for adequate recreation. Inspector Emil Sandstrom offered a comparative assessment of American camps against those in other nations. Having personally inspected prisoner facilities in Canada, Great Britain, and Australia, he definitively stated, "American camps offer superior conditions." This distinction is not merely material, but profoundly philosophical. The Americans treat prisoners as temporarily displaced individuals rather than as outright enemies. Prisoners of war working in American factories gained invaluable insights into production methodologies that revolutionized their understanding of industrial efficiency. At the Lone Star Steel Plant in Doengerfield, Texas, where prisoners from Camp Hearn were employed between 1944 and 1947-45, monthly production consistently surpassed the entire annual output of the Ruhr Valley prior to the Allied bombing campaigns. The key to this remarkable achievement was not solely advanced machinery, but also a potent motivational factor. Company records reveal that workers actively competed for production bonuses, proactively suggested efficiency improvements, and derived a sense of pride from their output. Production charts displayed the performance of each shift akin to sports scores. Employees proudly wore company pins, purchased war bonds with their overtime earnings, and even painted the names of bomber aircraft on steel destined for military use. Morale, it became evident, was a more significant driver of productivity than mere supervision. At the Texas railroad yards, where POWs were engaged in the loading of materials, the sophisticated coordination of operations astounded German logistics officers. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad employed prisoners of war at its Smithville Yard, where they observed firsthand the remarkable efficiency of American logistics. Trains arrived with clockwork precision according to meticulously planned schedules. Loading equipment operated continuously and without interruption. Telegraph and telephone systems seamlessly coordinated nationwide transport efforts. There was no overarching central planning committee. Instead, it was the innate organization of capitalism adapting itself for wartime production. As Germany neared collapse in the spring of 1945, American authorities began preparing prisoners for their return to a devastated homeland. This preparation, meticulously documented in occupation planning records, extended far beyond simple repatriation. The War Department initiated Project Paperclip, primarily for scientists, but also implemented broader initiatives aimed at equipping former POWs to contribute to the rebuilding of a democratic Germany. Comprehensive courses in civil administration were designed to prepare them for managing the complexities of rebuilding destroyed cities. Agricultural training focused on the urgent need to feed starving populations. Medical personnel received instruction in public health techniques crucial for epidemic prevention. Engineers were educated in the principles of infrastructure reconstruction. The Special Projects Division identified individuals within the prisoner population who showed potential as democratic leaders, providing them with additional specialized training in governance and administration. The extensive scope of this preparatory work is thoroughly documented in Prost Marshal General reports. By May of 1945, an impressive 31,000 prisoners of war had enrolled in vocational training programs. 18,000 were studying English. 12,000 were participating in agricultural initiatives. 8,500 were engaged in technical courses, and 6,200 were pursuing business administration studies. Concepts that would later form the basis of the Marshall Plan were explained to prisoners well before their public announcement. Officials from the State Department visited the camps, elucidating American intentions to foster reconstruction rather than impose punishment upon Germany. This act of profound generosity from victor to vanquished irrevocably shattered the lingering vestiges of Nazi ideology concerning racial conflict and the brutal principle of survival of the fittest. The sheer volume of numbers illustrates the immense scope of this transformation. Out of a total of 425,000 German prisoners held in America, a mere 2,222 escape attempts were recorded, representing just 0.52%. Only 54 individuals successfully evaded confinement for periods exceeding 30 days, accounting for a minuscule 0.01%. Incidents of sabotage were confirmed in 7 instances, a thus statistically insignificant 0.001%. Work refusals, while more common, were documented in 178 cases, totaling 0.04%. Notably, voluntary labor participation rates reached an impressive 87% among eligible prisoners. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupation authorities revealed that a remarkable 74% of repatriated former POWs held favorable views of American democracy. Upon the announcement of the Marshall Plan, 61% expressed support for the initiative. 55% advocated for a future German-American alliance. 38% articulated a desire to immigrate to the United States. 23% maintained ongoing correspondence with American families they had come to know. Immigration records further indicate that approximately 5,000 former POWs legally relocated to America during the 1950s. Naturalization records demonstrate that an overwhelming 92% of these individuals became citizens within the eligible time frame. Their subsequent success in America, measured by factors such as stable employment, home ownership, and an absence of criminal records, demonstrably surpassed the general immigrant population. The significant impact of returned former POWs on the reconstruction of West Germany is well documented in occupation records and archival materials housed in Germany. Former prisoners of war ascended to influential positions within the newly established democratic government. 48 individuals were elected to serve as members of the Bundestag. 312 held mayoral offices or served on city councils. 1,847 contributed to the modernization of agriculture. 2,341 imparted knowledge as educators in reconstituted schools. 4,165 managed businesses, applying the innovative American methods they had learned. Hans-Georg von Studnitz, a former prisoner of war and later a prominent German industrialist, shared with American historians in 1965, "We returned from America with far more than mere memories. We carried with us an understanding of how democracy functions, the principles of free market economies, and the practicalities of diverse peoples working cooperatively. We had glimpsed the future, and we knew it was a viable model." Camp Hearn ceased its operations in December of 1945, yet the enduring connections forged there persisted. The Hearn Heritage League diligently maintains archives of correspondence from former prisoners of war that spans a period of 40 years. Annual Christmas cards continued to arrive without fail until the passing of the last known prisoner in 2001. These letters serve as poignant evidence of sustained personal transformation, extending far beyond any temporary influence. In 1984, coinciding with the 40th anniversary of D-Day, 50 former prisoners of war from Camp Hearn journeyed back to Texas. The Hearn Democrat extensively covered this remarkable reunion. Former adversaries embraced their former custodians. Veterans of the Wehrmacht laid floral tributes at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann, speaking on behalf of the assembled group, articulated, "We arrived as enemies, harboring beliefs in racial superiority and national destiny. We departed as friends, having grasped that democracy's perceived chaos is, in fact, its inherent strength, and that diversity fosters unity rather than undermining it." Historians have extensively documented the multifaceted experiences of German prisoners of war in America. Arnold Kramer's seminal work, Nazi Prisoners of War in America, 1979, provides a comprehensive historical record. Judith Gansberg's Stalag, USA, 1977, offers an insightful analysis of the re-education programs implemented. Antonio Thompson's Men in German Uniform, 2010, examines the utilization of prisoner labor. Ron Robbins' The Barbed Wire College, 1995, details the profound educational transformations that occurred. These scholarly contributions, grounded in meticulous archival research, personal interviews, and official government records, unequivocally confirm the extensive scope and undeniable success of these transformative experiences. The prevailing consensus among these historical accounts is that the American approach to German POWs represents history's most successful instance of re-education through immersive exposure rather than coercive indoctrination. The German prisoners of war who arrived in America between 1943 and 1946 encountered realities that defied the very foundations of their worldview. Every casual act of freedom, every small gesture of kindness, every inexplicable act of generosity accumulated into a profound ideological reevaluation. They had anticipated encountering a nation characterized by weakness and internal division. Instead, they discovered a society so self-assured that it could extend mercy to its adversaries. This profound transformation was not achieved through deliberate propaganda, but through the unvarnished force of lived reality. German POWs witnessed democracy functioning effectively amidst apparent disarray. They observed the progress of racial integration, a concept that ran counter to their deeply ingrained segregationist beliefs. They watched women exercising positions of authority while simultaneously embodying femininity. They experienced enemies transitioning into friends through the simple yet powerful application of basic human decency. These seemingly ordinary occurrences, mundane to Americans but revolutionary to individuals raised under totalitarian regimes, accomplished what military defeat alone could not achieve: a complete ideological capitulation. The prisoners of war did not merely witness American power. They experienced its underlying values firsthand. They did not simply observe democracy. They actively participated in it. America's most significant triumph was not secured on the battlefields, but within the confines of its prison camps, where adversaries were transformed into staunch advocates through the simple act of witnessing American life in its unadulterated form. The sights that initially stunned them were unusual only to eyes accustomed to the rigid constraints of tyranny. To American observers, these were merely the everyday realities of life, messy, imperfect, but undeniably free. The German POWs arrived with the expectation of encountering adversaries. Instead, they found reflections of their own potential for positive change. These extraordinary observations sowed the seeds for the future Atlantic Alliance, the ambitious Marshall Plan, and the subsequent democratic reconstruction of Europe. Their personal transformations stand as irrefutable proof that sometimes the most profound victories are achieved not through destruction, but through demonstration, not through propaganda, but through authentic experience, and not through hatred, but through the enduring power of humanity. The remarkable sights that German prisoners of war witnessed in America became the bedrock upon which one of history's most successful transformations, from sworn enemy to steadfast ally, was built.